Hello, Carmel. Excellent. We can hear you and see you. It is now 2:30 p.m. in Geneva. We are still waiting for one panelist to join. So perhaps we can give him a couple of more minutes before we start, and then we go ahead.
Hi, Yannicka. I see Todd has just joined.
Excellent. Then I think we are okay to start. Sam, would you like to just say hello before Hossein takes the floor?
Hi.
Excellent. Okay, Hossein, would you mind kicking off the meeting?
Thank you. Thank you, Yannicka. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, friends. Welcome to this Nexus Dialogue of the Environment Management Group on investing in sustainable infrastructure and in natural infrastructure. This is our pleasure to host this dialogue as part of series of EMG dialogues that has started actually since the adoption of the SDGs, trying to look into complex but interrelated and interlinked issues of sustainable development agenda, where exploration of these topics would help collaboration amongst various sectors, identifying emerging issues, and also common resources in order to support countries in realization of sustainable development goals in an integrated and inclusive manner. So this is our honor and pleasure to host this dialogue with a number of distinguished experts. I would like just in the beginning highlight the importance of this topic because it embraces a number of issues and challenges that if they are addressed, they can turn into real opportunities for collaboration. The nexus of sustainable infrastructure is the one that brings issues such as resilience, human rights, protection of biodiversity into our sort of consideration. It has two sides. For some years we have been talking about it in the context of avoiding harm out of unprecedented infrastructure and trying to make sure that the infrastructure is happening with the minimum amount of harm to the nature and also the humanity. But over years, we also have advanced in looking at the positive impact of sustainable infrastructure, both for humanity in terms of creating sustainable jobs and green jobs, but also for the nature by having positive impact for biodiversity. So it's good that we have grown our understanding, our knowledge around this topic. It is good that we have been able to bring this topic to the attention of international fora, such as the Environmental Assembly of the UN, UNEP, that has issued now 2 resolutions about this topic. And it is good that we have also produced international good practices on sustainable infrastructure. So there is a domain of work which is evolving, that requires further contemplation within and outside the UN system. It is also very promising that we have started looking at this issue from the point of view of the UN internal operation, internal management, internal facilities, so that the UN also be a leader in sustainable infrastructure when it comes to its own buildings and its infrastructures and operation. So today, we are going to have a very interesting discussion. I hope that we are able to tackle issues such as potentials in investing in natural infrastructure as a priority for COVID-19 recovery packages, including potential social, economic, and environmental co-benefits of investing in natural infrastructure. We also hope to look into the issues relating to the implementation challenges and opportunities for mainstreaming natural infrastructure into national infrastructure planning and investment, including fostering policy coherence across relevant ministries. We also would like to explore promising and innovative financing mechanisms for natural infrastructure. We also would like to benefit, as I said earlier, from this discussion to keep the political momentum out of the UNEA resolution on sustainable infrastructure in order to identify certain key actions for implementation of these at global and also at the national level. I would like also to really grow, as I said, the discourse surrounding the natural infrastructure, exploring the interrelated topics such as human rights, such as peace, resilience, and then see how this nexus can be a potential for collaboration amongst different sectors. So with those words, I would like to invite the moderator, our colleague from, let me just read out the names here, if I have it. So we have a distinguished moderator, Mrs. Samantha Stratton Schult. I hope that I have spelled your name correctly. You would apologize me. And then happy to involve into this discussion. This meeting is being recorded for facilitation of our preparation of the proceedings of this meeting. We really hope that from this discussion we can generate some recommendations that would help the work of the current issue management group of the EMG on sustainable infrastructure, which is an interagency process in the UN system that would help this process also to address these emerging aspects of sustainable infrastructure, for it also to support member states. I think one of the key issues that I would be personally very much interested to explore is that how much we can through this process help UN country teams in helping member states in integrating sustainable infrastructure as part of their national sustainable development agendas, as part of the UN cooperation agreement with countries. How can actually we engage private sector into this process, and how can actually we can benefit from the recent developments in international fora, such as the recent adoption of the human rights on healthy environment. How can that basically facilitates follow-up of sustainable infrastructure at the global and also at the national level. So with that, I would like to pass it over to our dear moderator or facilitator, Jannica, if I am following correctly the scripts. And I'm in your hands also to be engaged in the discussion and also interact with colleagues of the panel. With that, I pass it over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hussein, for that introduction to this meeting today, and also to myself, and thank you for inviting me to moderate this session. I'm really excited to hear from our panelists today. Natural infrastructure is a fascinating nexus area of opportunity. It's complex, but potentially hugely rewarding. Coming from UNOPS, where implementation is really our focus, I can suggest that there are many challenges to implementation and making this happen. Not least that it really goes against a sort of historical ideal of what engineering and infrastructure have been, and that is really to control nature rather than to work with it or to protect it. So this is really exciting, and we've had the opportunity recently to work with UNEP, among other partners and national governments, to look at how we can look at the infrastructure planning and projects, and we've also contributed to the sustainable infrastructure principles. And now we look at how we can really mainstream this area. So today we'll begin with key remarks from the IUCN, followed by initial expert remarks by each of our panelists. We'll then proceed to the moderated discussion. And so in preparation for this Nexus Dialogue, we have developed the following guiding questions relating to investing in natural infrastructure. So what are some specific financing structures and mechanisms needed to increase investments in natural infrastructure? How can we integrate discourse around natural infrastructure into existing and future COVID-19 recovery packages? What are the implementation challenges and opportunities to mainstream natural infrastructure into natural infrastructure planning and investment policies? Who are additional stakeholders we need to engage to increase the inclusivity and resilience of the recommended solutions? And what are 3 actionable next steps that the UN system can work towards advocating for and investing in natural infrastructure? So we look forward to discussing these issues with all of you. So if I can introduce our speakers today. First of all, we'll have Mr. Alireza Rizvi, Head of Climate Change at the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Then we'll have Ms. Midori Paxton, Head of Ecosystems and Biodiversity at the United Nations Development Programme. Then Mr. Todd Howland, Chief Development, Economic and Social Issues Branch of the Office of the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights. Ms. Carmel Lev, Strategy and Partnership Specialist of the Global Infrastructure Facility. Mr. Brendan Youngman, Lead Global Program on Nature-Based Solutions for Climate Resilience at the World Bank. And Ms. Katuta Conde, Representative, Network of Indigenous Youth of Latin America and the Caribbean. It's my pleasure to give the floor now to Mr. Alireza Rizvi to give his key remarks.
Thank you to the EMG Secretariat for convening this Nexus Dialogue, and thanks to Ms. Samantha for facilitating this discussion on such a pressing topic. I'm sorry, somehow my camera is not getting integrated into this program, so you can't see me. Hope you can hear me well. Infrastructure provides indispensable services for global development, such as electricity, nutrition, water, healthcare, education, shelter, and job creation. However, today we are facing the triple planetary crisis of accelerating climate change, worsening biodiversity loss, and mounting pollution and waste, coupled with economic and social turmoil from the COVID-19 pandemic and other crises. In this changing context, the provision of essential services from infrastructure is increasingly challenged by new hazards and disruptions. Furthermore, current infrastructure practices often undermine sustainable development through environmental degradation. Business as usual development of built and grey infrastructure, especially in the context of changing climate, is not sufficient to meet future needs. The integration of natural infrastructure and nature-based solutions are key for providing resilient infrastructure services and achieving the SDGs. Nature-based solutions can provide infrastructure services cost-effectively while also offering multiple co-benefits for the environment, human health and well-being, and local economies. For example, mangrove ecosystems alone are estimated to provide over $65 billion in flood protection across the system, provide all risk and climate risk to be handled effectively. And in addition, the investment in natural infrastructure together with grey infrastructure can build more resilient infrastructure and extend the lifespan of infrastructure investment. This clear and pressing need is embodied in Principle 4 on avoiding environmental impact and investment in nature of the International Good Practices Principles of Sustainable Infrastructure. However, despite clear benefits of natural infrastructure, widespread implementation has been hampered by a lack of financial mechanisms dedicated to scaling up implementation, as well as gaps in technical and institutional capacity. So far, only 5% of global climate finance flows are spent on adaptation, and only 1.4% of this on nature-based solutions for adaptation. Meanwhile, an estimated $94 trillion will be spent on infrastructure globally over the next 20 years. We urgently need to direct a portion of this investment toward natural infrastructure and hybrid gray-green approaches. To meet this financing gap and mainstream natural infrastructure, investment will need to come in the form of public, private, and innovative blended finance mechanisms. At the same time, a broader enabling environment must be fostered that encourages the private and public sectors to invest in natural and hybrid infrastructure by de-risking such investment through financial vehicles ranging from concessional capital and loans, grants, and insurance. Mechanisms that provide technical assistance and strengthen institutional capacity will also be critical for ensuring that funding is translated into effective implementation on the ground. A willingness to invest in natural infrastructure is underpinned by awareness and capacity building, policy integration, and supportive regulatory frameworks, and a robust evidence base of effectiveness. Natural infrastructure cannot only be the domain of the environmental agencies. It is cross-cutting and must be mainstream across national ministries and sectors that rely on infrastructure, energy, and transportation. At the same time, we must also ensure that natural infrastructure finance is diversified and made accessible in a way that helps the most vulnerable and facilitates locally led interventions in an equitable and participatory manner, and acknowledges the importance of indigenous knowledge and local experiences. In recognition of these needs, Iucn works to mainstream and attract funding for nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure. In addition to its many projects on the ground, Iucn partners with diverse organizations on advocacy, policy influence, and knowledge sharing, all of which are crucial for catalyzing further funding, such as through the Friends of EBA-FIBA network and its support of the Global Green-Grey Infrastructure Community of Practice. Iucn also supports the acceleration of financing for nature-based solutions through its grant mechanisms, including the Global EBA Fund, the Nature Plus Accelerator Fund, and the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility, which collectively make up around $200 million in available funding for natural infrastructure and other nature-based solutions. Current economic valuation research estimates that an investment of $1 in climate adaptation and resilience yields at least $4 in benefits on average. At this 1:4 impact ratio, Iucn investments over the last 5 years have resulted in approximately $1 trillion worth of benefits, not to mention the additional non-monetary benefits of investing in natural infrastructure and climate resilience. Today, we'll have the privilege of hearing the other speakers deep dive into the topic. I look forward to the insights from the panelists on how further investment in natural infrastructure can be catalyzed. Thank you. Now I hand over the floor to Samantha Short. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ali Raza Rizvi, for your key remarks. If we can move now to Miss Midori Paxton.
Thank you very much, Samantha. And it's a pleasure to be part of this panel this morning or evening for me. Yeah, Fatma, I was just wondering if you could put up just one photo in, during the first few minutes or so, because I'd like to start my initial intervention with this photo of the living bridge of Meghalaya, India. I saw this, I learned about this bridge, I think in a BBC documentary some years ago, and it really made a very strong impression on me, because these bridges are built by indigenous people in probably the rainiest part of the world, and by training living aerial roots of the Indian rubber fig tree. So these living bridges crisscross rivers that swell in violent monsoons in seasons, and which would likely wash away any other forms of bridge. But for many centuries, they have provided reliable and safe passage to local populations. And I always feel that this is a stunning example of natural infrastructure. So the G20 Global Infrastructure Outlook indicates that $94 trillion in investment is needed by 2040 to close infrastructure gaps, with a further $3.5 trillion needed to achieve universal access to drinking water and electricity by 2030. So, but infrastructure can also be a major threat to biodiversity and ecosystem functioning, as all of us know. The impact of roads on deforestation and habitat fragmentation is very well documented. Perhaps we can take off the photo now. And also, according to the World Economic Forum, 29% of the threat to biodiversity are caused by infrastructure development, including roads and dams and energy production facilities. So we need to ensure that the massive infrastructure investment, which is supposed to be coming, will not adversely impact on nature, destroying at the same time natural infrastructure that is providing a range of ecosystem services. So, and I have seen a number of researches also that show efficacy and cost effectiveness of natural infrastructure. For example, research by International Institute for Sustainable Development shows that nature-based infrastructure provides identically effective and more resilient infrastructure services for up to 50% cheaper than traditional grey infrastructure. And also, in addition, they say that nature-based infrastructure's added value is 28% greater than grey infrastructure, which in dollar terms translate into $489 billion US per annum. So these additional values come from the variety of ecosystem services which nature-based infrastructure provides and also enhances. And if the world met its current business as usual global infrastructure needs, but swapped, according to this same study, but swapped just over 11% of traditional or grey infrastructure with nature-based infrastructure instead, we would be also saving $248 billion each year. So this all sounds like a no-brainer, but too often investment in nature-based solutions suffer from the invisibility of nature's value in the financial and economic calculus. And traditionally, valuations for infrastructure projects focus only on a narrow set of financial indicators that do not measure the underlying value of nature or the cost of its loss. And this results in a disproportionate flow of investment to grey infrastructure, regardless of its relative cost ineffectiveness compared with natural infrastructure in many cases, and regardless of the negative impacts of infrastructure development, which we often see on nature. So this really needs to change immediately to ascertain the true cost and benefit of infrastructure project. So I stop there for now and hand over to, I think, Mr. Todd Howland from OHCHR. Thank you.
And thanks, Miss Midori Paxton. That's for your opening remarks. Yes, and on to Mr. Todd Howland, OHCHR.
Good afternoon, and good morning. I just wanted to thank the organizers for the invitation. OHCHR is proud to actively contribute to the work of the Environmental Management Group, including its Nexus Dialogues, which play such an important role in bringing together members of the Environmental Management Group to address new and emerging topics like the one we're dealing with today. Indeed, OHCHR recently supported the organization of a series of Nexus Dialogues on human rights and the environment, which ultimately led to the establishment of a new issues management group on human rights and the environment. Our experience working with the EMG has shown it to be an incredibly valuable space for advancing human rights, including the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. It is my pleasure to share with you today a few thoughts related to human rights in the context of natural infrastructure. A human rights-based approach proactively shapes the way finance is programmed and guards against the risk that is used to support projects that result in human rights violations and the exacerbation of social and economic inequalities. While the threat that the triple planetary crisis poses to the enjoyment of human rights is immense, responses to environmental degradation also have potential to undermine a range of procedural and substantive human rights, often through impacts on access to and use of natural resources. These risks include infringement on the rights of affected individuals and communities to access to information, participation, livelihoods, land, culture, self-determination, and effective remedy. Integrating human rights considerations into sustainable development finance promotes better outcomes for people and planet. This is just as true for nature-based solutions, including natural infrastructure, as for other types of development projects. People have been displaced from their traditional lands, resources, and territories in the name of development, and sometimes in the name of conservation. Often to the detriment of people and planet, natural infrastructure can refer to the ecosystems that indigenous peoples, local communities, peasants, and people are reliant upon in those natural systems for their livelihoods, and they have coexisted with these natural systems for generations. Indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge, applied with their free, prior, and informed consent, can be an important resource for protecting natural infrastructure, because many indigenous people are part of and shape natural systems where they live. Preserving these systems through a rights-based approach requires recognizing land and resource rights and channeling finance to natural infrastructure projects that respect and fulfill human rights, that benefit people in vulnerable situations and are inclusive and participatory. The people most affected by environmental harms often know best how to benefit from, sustainably use, and preserve natural infrastructure where they live. States should share resources, knowledge, and technology in order to prevent and remedy environmental degradation and corresponding human rights harms. The principles of equity and common but differentiated responsibility should shape the obligations of developed countries to provide finance to address negative environmental impacts in developing countries, including through natural infrastructure projects. Formal or informal dialogues with key existing financial institutions, for example, the GCF, Global Environmental Facility, the Adaptation Fund, Climate Investment Funds, LDC's Fund, World Bank, IMF, regional development banks, are needed to better and more coherently integrate both human rights and sustainability in their work, ensuring that natural infrastructure projects that benefit people and planet are prioritized and human rights risks are assessed and avoided. Policymakers have an obligation to promote the fulfillment of human rights to information, participation. Natural infrastructure projects must actively support stakeholder participation throughout the project approval, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation stages. Transparency should be ensured during the project program cycle, as well as provision of financial support and capacity building by international mechanisms to ensure and enable recipient countries to strengthen their engagement with stakeholders. General assessment of social and environmental policy implementations could be developed, focusing on a wider range of funds and/or human rights. Focus on groups which fund themselves in the most vulnerable situations. Thanks very much. Back to you, Samantha.
Thank you so much for those initial remarks, Todd. So moving on to Ms. Carmel Lev from the Global Infrastructure Facility.
Thank you. Thank you, Hussein and Ali, for your opening remarks, and to Samantha for facilitating this discussion. It's a pleasure to participate in my first Nexus Dialogue on investing in natural infrastructure alongside the other panelists here today. So thank you. So from my perspective, working at the Global Infrastructure Facility, which is a project preparation facility that's housed at the World Bank, we really see that channeling needed finance into sustainable and natural infrastructure falls into this tension that we're seeing between quantity and quality. So from a quantity perspective, it's well understood that infrastructure investment is needed, on the order of 2.6 trillion annually by 2030 to meet the SDGs and stay on the path towards a net zero society by 2050. But we also know that there is really no shortage of private capital or interest in the market to support natural infrastructure solutions. So the primary issue that we're seeing really stems from pipeline. That is, projects that are considered bankable that have undergone the rigorous technical, environmental, and social impact studies needed before they are brought to market. And this is where entities like the GIF can play a really critical role in supporting governments in emerging markets through the 10 MDB partners that we work with. So we work to promote these pipelines of bankable infrastructure programs and projects. And so we're seeing that quantity, so that is the pipeline, is really just one side of the equation. And crucially, channeling more finance into sustainable and natural infrastructure must also consider factors such as quality. And so natural infrastructure projects that are high quality in terms of design require such considerations as value for money, efficiencies across the life cycle of a project, and integration of climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience considerations to help prolong the asset life. And so understanding this dynamic between improving both the quantity and quality of natural infrastructure pipelines are really essential preconditions to channeling more finance into such projects. And we're seeing, and I think some of the other panelists spoke of earlier, that it really does also make good business sense. We see and know that investments in sustainable infrastructure are seen to be more resilient, more capable of withstanding the adverse impacts of climate change and other external shocks brought on by COVID. And additionally, there are a variety of tools, frameworks, and taxonomies, as well as certification schemes in the market to help facilitate investment decision-making around natural infrastructure projects. And one in particular that I'll probably delve into more during the moderated discussion is the Finance to Accelerate the Sustainable Transition Initiative, or FAST Infra, and the Sustainable Infrastructure label that we launched back in November during COP26, which really seeks to ensure that infrastructure assets are designed, built, and operated such that sustainability from all angles are integrated in a very holistic manner. So these types of tools really serve as important guideposts to the market on which infrastructure assets are truly sustainable, including natural infrastructure projects. So this is both important from the project preparation perspective, where the GIF sits, to inform that infrastructure assets that we're helping to develop alongside our client governments are prepared and designed with these considerations in mind. But also further downstream for the private sector, those ESG aligned investors who are quite keen to move their capital into such projects, but need these types of framework tools and the sort of well-structured assets themselves into which they can channel their funds. So I'll stop there, kind of keeping my opening remarks quite brief so I can delve a little bit more into some of the initiatives that the GIF is working on. So I will pass it back to Samantha to introduce the next panelist. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmel. Yes, so next we have Brendan Youngman, also from the World Bank.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Thanks for having me in this great panel, and thanks to the EMG Secretariat for hosting us today. I think a lot of good points have been made, and let me also continue upon some of the points made by Carmel on the previous note. So I think, first of all, from my perspective, and it was mentioned before, it's clear that we need to invest in nature in general, irrespective of the infrastructure services that these may offer, and we need to do it big. So we're still losing natural areas and species at record levels. Natural ecosystems support our planet, our economy, and they're one of the only pillars that we have to really mitigate climate change through carbon storage. So without preserving nature, meeting either these economic development or climate change goals will be impossible. At the same time, we see a continuous big gap in financing towards adaptation and to sustainable infrastructure, and nature-based solutions are part of that equation, and they could contribute to both the nature and the financing adaptation gaps by bringing multiple benefits, including biodiversity, but also recreation, job creation, livelihoods into infrastructure investments. The key is, of course, as was mentioned by the previous speaker as well, is that we need to design, implement, and maintain these solutions in such a way that they actually maintain and achieve those goals. And that is not always clear, and we're not always good at actually bringing that out. So at the World Bank, we just finished an updated analysis to map the scope of investment we have been doing in nature-based solutions for the resilience side of things over the past years. And we see that since 2012, we invested over 5 billion in projects, activities with nature-based solutions in them. And these span all regions. They range from urban parks to fight flooding and heat to river restoration projects, mangroves for coastal resilience, and nature-based approaches for landslide mitigation to protect highway infrastructure, for example. Now, this is already quite significant, and the trend is clearly upwards, but it remains a modest share of the total amount of financing to infrastructure and adaptation. We have now established a dedicated global program on nature-based solutions for climate resilience to help our teams and our clients with the further upscaling of NBS approaches. And the program develops knowledge, supports our lending operations, and builds partnerships with other co-financiers and other technical experts on NBS. We also see that nature-based solutions and green infrastructure basically are included in the World Bank's Climate Change Action Plan, the targets of IDAF, our Fund for the Poorest Countries, and also in our COVID response plan. So it's definitely trickled all over the strategic and also the operational work that the World Bank is now doing, and that's a good sign, although a lot of work still needs to be done. I think from my perspective, when engaging with our client countries, this multi-beneficial nature of nature-based solutions or a green infrastructure is really what is driving the increasing demand for these kind of solutions. In Beira, in Mozambique, for example, where the World Bank and the government of Germany have jointly financed the creation of one of Africa's largest urban parks with a dedicated flood management function. You can really see this firsthand when you go there. This is a large park along a river. It protects the city against a certain return period of flooding, but it's also a vibrant news center of the city, providing children and families with a place to relax, play, host weddings, other social and economic activities, and the tidal ecosystem that was rehabilitated is home to fish, crabs, and birds. So it's very clear when you walk around that in investing only in hard riverbank protection to achieve the flood protection function of the infrastructure would have missed out on creating all of those benefits while probably spending an equal amount of money in doing so. So I think trends are going up. We have a few of these good examples to share where things are definitely working out in natural infrastructure. There's also a long way to go still, I think. So expanding financing, like we're discussing today, is a key part of the equation, and I welcome discussion on that. Making sure that we design natural infrastructure projects in such a way that they benefit nature biodiversity on the long run while performing those infrastructure functions. So they're not just short-term green-looking interventions is another key aspect, and it's linked to the financing equation as well, and the carbon finance equation, for example. So thanks again for having me, and looking forward to the discussion as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Brendan. And now for our final expert, Kantunda Conde, Network of Indigenous Youth of Latin America and the Caribbean.
Mahacha Ruskipawita Kechuiman Vigilatanaka Kuyakanaka. My name is Kantuta, and I am part of the Network of Indigenous Youth and focal point of the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. My work during these two spaces as a regional platform has allowed me to see the experience of Indigenous youth in a regional platform which articulates the local, national, and regional processes of youth organizations, Indigenous organizations, with focal points for youth or Indigenous leaders. So starting to think about natural-based solutions and natural infrastructure, I like to remember that Indigenous peoples are the holders of 80% of Earth's biodiversity, and their traditional knowledge has been the way of protecting all this biodiversity. So firstly, a note before entering all of this discussion is the relationship between traditional knowledge and youth. So the fight to decolonize current urban planning and design practices for the sake of extractive development projects is a historical fight of Indigenous peoples. Our elders have reclaimed the land and their own land governance to take care of Mother Earth with their traditional-based practices. From the Youth Network, we have managed to demonstrate the strong relationship between traditional knowledge and identity as a remedy for colonial trauma. Colonization, land grabbing, marginalization of Indigenous governance, biodiversity, and traditional knowledge loss have produced a deep wound in the youth, particularly in two spheres. Firstly, traditional knowledge are a central part of the identity and livelihoods of Indigenous peoples. Our traditional knowledge are our myths, our dances, our stories that extend from agricultural or nature-based solutions. TK, traditional knowledge, has a cultural, economic, social, and spiritual value that represents all of the holistic nature of Indigenous peoples. For example, traditional medicine and traditional plants. Traditional knowledge explains our individuality as youth, as Indigenous youth, and our collectivity as members of our families and of our communities. Secondly, traditional knowledge is mainly oral and shared within generations. So traditional knowledge is shared mostly in indigenous languages and holds a strong connection to the land. So in this regard, discrimination and racism hinders the relationship of youth to their identity and to the interest of indigenous youth to learn their traditional knowledge. For these reasons, indigenous youth have the big responsibility and the strong responsibility to be the guardians of that traditional knowledge. We have to continue as indigenous youth to protect this traditional knowledge, which includes land governance and natural-based solutions in our communities. We understand that this is a fight of indigenous peoples in general, and we are going to continue on the path of our elders. However, the relationship between the identity and the racism that indigenous youth face is closely related to the protection and the promotion of traditional knowledge and the promotion of our identity. Thank you.
Thank you, Comtuta, for that very interesting and from the heart explanation. Yes, your initial remarks. So I think that that is all of the initial expert remarks that we've had, and I think that's it's been a very interesting opening. It shows what a diversity of panelists we have, which has been fantastic. I mean, I think to begin with, we've had a lot of expressions of how important this way of working with natural infrastructure or nature-based solutions really is, not just for the planet, but actually for helping the most vulnerable as a human right, as something that is integral to the indigenous ways of life. And I think we've also looked at some examples of some really I guess amazing projects like or amazing examples of natural infrastructure, whether you can call it a project or not, if it wasn't done explicitly by humans. But and we've talked a lot about the numbers in terms of, and we hear this all the time, you know, the huge gap that there is in terms of infrastructure, how much infrastructure is going to be built over the next few years, how much of this is needed to actually fill the gap in equality, to fill the gap in terms of reaching net zero. We've got these huge challenges ahead of us, without a doubt, and nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure somehow fit into this. And I think that listening to the panelists, one of the things that I don't know if you noticed this as well, but there are different entry points, I think, in the different ways that we're seeing this, and I think that's really powerful, and it's probably also highlights how complex this is. And what I'm referring to is, you know, are we talking about infrastructure that is natural, that we're trying to restore or protect? Are we talking about using nature to protect infrastructure? Are we talking about something that's in between in terms of a mutual benefit? And I think it's all of these things, but it can be different things for different projects, and I think different organizations are coming at this from a different perspective, and that can be part of the challenges that we face as well in terms of are we understanding each other. So I was wondering if you know, one of the things that we could to start with is about the sort of implementation challenges and opportunities. I think everybody's covered a lot about, you know, why this is so important, and the key benefits why we should be doing this. But we know that there are many challenges, and Carmel, you did cover some of the issues to getting the finance that is out there, and I think we need to touch on that in much more detail in terms of what GIF is doing and what more needs to be done. But I think that there are more benefits, more challenges, and perhaps we want to look at what are the policy challenges, what are the financing challenges, what are the practical challenges, and I think that there's an inherent component, an inherent part of nature, which tell me if you agree or you disagree. But working both with people and with nature has a time element. And what we're constantly talking about is how urgent the needs are at the moment. And yet we know that building with nature and building with people, actually getting people to own it and to be empowered to deliver it, takes time. And so I'm wondering if not only we talk about some of those barriers, but also what is realistic? What can we do? Are there any examples out there that actually look at how we can really scale up when these things are perhaps inherently not fast? And do we need to, or is this just the wrong paradigm altogether? So does anybody want to start with an answer, with their reflections?
I can say a few words, Samantha, from my perspective.
So that's Brendan?
Yes, that's Brendan. Yes.
Okay, and then Todd, and then
do we jump in on this, or do we raise our hand?
yeah, people were raising their hands. So Brendan, Todd, and then Midori. Thank you.
I apologize.
No, that's fine.
So
technology.
So quick notion from my end. I fully agree on what you are saying, and I think there are places for natural infrastructure, there are places for gray infrastructure, and there's almost all projects and interventions I think can have this aspect of having both gray and green. I think one area that we need to be aware of as an international community as well, and as people working in this field, is not to overpromise what natural solutions by themselves can do, and not create unrealistic expectations to the countries that we are working with. So I think protecting nature, has a benefit on its own. Some infrastructure investment is needed for the benefit on its own, and where we can merge those is where we can do amazing things, I think. Me coming myself from the Netherlands, country, under the sea level, if my country would rely on natural infrastructure, it would be underwater. There's no way that you can protect the communities that live there with natural infrastructure alone. Of course, going back in time, you could have said, well, we do land planning, we let the natural tidal areas free of people, and then we don't live there, and then you can start from there. But in many countries, that's not the situation where you are. You'll need some drainage, you need hard defenses to protect against climate shocks. And where we can, we need to combine it with the green approaches, with natural infrastructure. And I think especially protecting those areas still with high concentration of natural area and relatively low concentration of human and economic activity. I think there we need to make integrated planning to balance the investment in natural protection as being one of the major investments, and having the grey infrastructure only where needed. But I think on the adaptation side of things, at least, and also on some of the other infrastructure angles, I think having that very clearly in mind of what can natural infrastructure achieve, what can it achieve in combination with grey and green, and where do we need some grey for the services that we need, I think is crucial to make sure that we have an open discussion, and that we can still do these type of actions in 20 years from now without having created too many false expectations. Thanks.
Thanks, Brendan. And Todd, do you want to add?
Thanks, Samantha. No, when you spoke of paradigm, I do think it's important that we begin to think of how the paradigm needs to shift. And I think part of that shift, human rights can help us. Because if we look at human rights and take human rights law, which is pre-existing legal obligations of most all member states, it helps us actually think about what result we want, what type of society we want. obviously now with the clarification of the right to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. But it goes beyond that to inclusivity, to dealing with inequalities, to respecting different cultures. And I think one of the challenges that we have is that for so long, human rights in the area of let's say, massive infrastructure projects and financing for development hasn't been really fully integrated in this work. And that we need to actually see human rights not as a, let's say, either irrelevant or some type of procedural pain in the neck, but we need to see it actually as reflective of the realities of these projects in terms of too often negative externalities are treated as normal and positive externalities are not treated as expected. And I think that that change actually can be achieved if we start taking human rights seriously, because in the end, all aspects of society, including the economy, should enhance the level of respect for human rights that we have. And so in terms of, that idea of a paradigm, I think it's very important that we take human rights seriously and that we really do dig down in understanding how, the recognition of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment recently by the Human Rights Council can be utilized as useful guardrails for these large infrastructure projects and financing. So thanks, Samantha.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I think that I think you're right in terms of this, the externalities, the negative externalities being seen as normal, positive ones aren't expected, and that goes to the EIA, the environmental impact assessments process. It's about trying to do no harm. Actually, clearly that hasn't necessarily been successful, but we need to look at the positive, right? How can we actually do positive, and hopefully the SDGs help with that, and I think the link to the positive benefit. This is certainly something that we find that people don't think about with infrastructure. They're not thinking about what infrastructure can bring to the SDGs, and I think that's really, really important. Midori, did you want to add?
Sure. Yeah, I fully agree what Todd was saying about, leveraging really human rights constituencies and instruments for nature, for safeguarding nature, for people, obviously, in the end. And I would also like to highlight some of the barriers. Samantha, you talked about barrier challenges to increased investment in natural infrastructure, and touch upon another sort of paradigm shift, which I think is needed, and also like to introduce a few examples of related work UNDP is supporting. So I have recently read that insurance company Swiss Re says that infrastructure investment is not only about the supply of finance, but the biggest constraints to unlock the private finance for natural infrastructure is the shortage of well-structured bankable project pipeline. We hear this for not only for infrastructure, but also about the nature-based enterprises, investment in those nature-based enterprises, but also insufficient ESG, environmental, social, and governance data, in particular insufficient nature-related ESG factors, which is very difficult to define. In particular, biodiversity is a major barrier for increasing investment in sustainable infrastructure. And the standard investors are also looking to identify asset classes in which to focus these ESG factors as part of the infrastructure investment decision making. I think Carmel already mentioned this as well. And along with, if you talk about asset class, I think it's about the time nature really needs to become or seen, recognized as asset class. We know from the global assessment of IPBES that $125 trillion, or maybe it was Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, but nature is worth 125 trillion, right? which would immediately make nature as the second largest asset class globally after, I believe, real estate. And this $125 trillion can either be nurtured and thrive, or it could be allowed to degrade and diminish exponentially if we don't invest. And that could result in the collapse of very foundation of our well-being and prosperity. So what we are doing as UNDP, I'd like to provide just two quick examples of our work related to natural infrastructure financing. So the first one is the TNFD. We are one of the founders of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD, which is working towards delivering a risk management and disclosure framework for investors and corporations to report and act on evolving nature-related risks, looking at also businesses' dependency on nature and impact on nature. And really ultimate aim is to shift global finance, especially private finance in this case, from nature negative towards nature positive outcome in a big way. And this reporting framework that identifies how nature impacts immediate financial performance or the longer term financial risks that may arise, put nature on the balance sheet. And so with this, I'm really hoping that nature ceases to be an invisible externality. And the initial beta framework was already released in March this year, and TNFD is now going through an iterative process through testing and piloting the beta framework with a range of financial institutions and corporate partners towards developing a version 1.0 release in September next year. And infrastructure sector is one of the priority sectors, along with, as you can imagine, food system, foods and agriculture and so on, for piloting in this phase of TNFD. And also with work with financial regulators and central banks are critical, and that's where, as United Nations entity, we are hoping to provide support in particular, although the task force itself is very much market-led, private sector-led, because the role of those government actors are important in terms of ensuring enabling policies and conditions for fast uptake of this nature-related disclosure framework. There's no point in producing beautiful framework if nobody is using it. So that was one example related to this. And another example is coral reef insurance. In 2018, I think the Nature Conservancy, Swiss Re, and Mexico State government of Quintana Roo partnered to develop the first coral reef insurance policy covering 160 kilometers of coastlines, including the tourism gateway of Cancun. And in this policy, coral reefs are recognized as natural infrastructure, equivalent to artificial coastal defenses such as breakwaters. And because obviously coral reefs can provide protection to communities and businesses and build infrastructure in coastal towns. And this insurance policy covered repair and reconstruction of coral reefs after severe storms, and providing communities the financial resources to manage the reefs and prevent erosion of coastlines. And in turn, the beautiful coral reefs continue to provide ecosystem services as a habitat for marine life, and as a very important tourism asset, providing communities livelihoods and opportunities for business. So I think this is a good example of financial instrument designed to maximize social objectives and also enhance biodiversity conservation. And we as UNDP has also been a partner in this effort and also working to replicate this sort of insurance instrument in other important coral areas around the world. Yeah, let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Majoy. That was really, really useful to get those examples. Really appreciate that. I'm just wondering, Kantuta, if you want to add, I'm just thinking if you see a role for Indigenous people and or youth to engage in a participatory process in these kind of mechanisms, or how you think we could best engage with these groups to get the best outcome.
Yes, thank you. I think that regarding the challenges for natural infrastructure and the relationship and the cooperation with Indigenous peoples, I think that it's vital to approach natural infrastructure in a holistic manner. Collective action can be achieved by including the government, investors, designers, academia, and Indigenous peoples and local communities. Acknowledging their skills and their experience will contribute to the promotion of natural infrastructures. Indigenous peoples must be consulted and involved as active contributors, all in accordance to free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples. Just talking about FPIC and the free, prior, and informed consent, the core principles of Indigenous peoples' rights are self-determination, respect for their traditional knowledge, culture, and traditional practices that contribute to sustainable and equitable development. And FPIC is a specific right that is recognized by the UNDRIP, but by the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which allows Indigenous peoples the consent to a project that may affect them or affect their land. Furthermore, FPIC enables Indigenous peoples to decide the conditions under which the project will be designed, implemented, monitored, and evaluated. Furthermore, we have Article 8J of the Convention of Biological Diversity, which encourages the equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of traditional knowledge or innovation and practices, which gives intellectual property of traditional knowledge to Indigenous peoples and promotes its application with active involvement of Indigenous peoples. Nonetheless, regarding the challenges, FPIC is not applied correctly in Indigenous peoples. FPIC is applied in a non-Indigenous language, when most of the population doesn't even speak English or Spanish. And secondly, the participation in the FPIC consultation is not inclusive. Most of the people who participate in the Indigenous community are men, which exclude women and youth. And regarding FPIC, not all information of the project is shared. So Indigenous peoples who live in high conditions of vulnerability, when a project shows and they say that they will pay an amount of money so they can make an infrastructure in their community, they accept it without knowing all the information. And we just have to see that Indigenous peoples are not only the victims of climate change, we are the leaders combating climate change. We need to be part of the discussions and solutions, because if we're not, we are victims of climate policies that go against Indigenous peoples' individual and collective rights. Nothing for us without us. Secondly, regarding the challenges in this relationship, colonial perspectives on culture and nature continue to shape the way governments allocate resources, which isolate Indigenous people's views on development. Usually projects romanticize the help and education and tools that they provide to Indigenous communities. This view tries to reduce Indigenous peoples' holistic knowledge to standard strategies. And these views add to the layers of oppression suffered by Indigenous peoples, like racism and not recognizing their Indigenous governments. So we have to ask ourselves, what is sustainable development for Indigenous peoples? And this is difficult to answer because Indigenous peoples have different views on sustainable development. For Aymara people, sustainable development is the Sumacamaña, which is the equilibrium of all members of nature. And the importance of including Indigenous peoples' views of sustainable development addresses the marginalization of Indigenous peoples and reflects the true view of development which will benefit the community. When all parties understand and respect the view of the other, sustainable development becomes a collective effort. For example, the Aramat project is a team of Indigenous organizations, governments, university researchers, and other research people working together on research and action to support the health and the well-being of the environment and of people. And the Aramat project is working to strengthen Indigenous voices and Indigenous researchers and their capacities to document their knowledge. And so in this way, Indigenous knowledge is considered equal to a standard science or standard practices. And I think that it is important that regarding these challenges, as other of the panelists said, human rights are important. And it's important to understand the different views that we have on development. And if natural infrastructure completes and adheres to this holistic way of traditional knowledge of Indigenous people, it will contribute not only Indigenous peoples, but the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Kantuta. I think, a couple of things that I think, stand out for me is one about the fact that, we have great principles already ready to be applied, but it's about getting them into sort of national government. When they're in national government, it's about actually getting them implemented on the ground. And that's really, really key. The job's not done. In fact, it's kind of a long way off, but at least there is a starting point already there. And I think you mentioned a few times in terms of what is sustainability, what is sustainable development to different groups. And I think that's really important to to come at it in terms of an open mind to what that means in different contexts. So thank you. Carmel, I really liked how you framed the sort of almost quantity versus quality of infrastructure and the challenge that there is in terms of getting quality out there, and that may be part of where the gap is. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about what GIF is doing in that area. I mean, is this about funding pre-feasibility studies and actually helping these projects define their quality or refine their quality? And are you seeing some of these risks that investors that are sort of slowing investors down around these projects? And if so, what are they? I mean, I think some of them are very obvious in terms of unfamiliarity with the types of practices and processes, and there is obviously a lot of crises going on that are constraining governments. But I'm wondering in terms of natural infrastructure specifically, what you're seeing.
For the question, and yeah, absolutely. I think the quantity conversation is so well known at this point. I almost seem like a broken record when I talk about it's pipeline. We need to just get more bankable projects out there. But critically, I think what can be lost in that conversation, and this is something that the Japanese presidency of the G20 really made central to their agenda, is the idea of quality infrastructure investments. And in fact, they put out a series of principles called the QII principles that, at least within the GIF, we really ensure that is integrated into all of the projects that we fund. And so GIF was created in 2014 as a G20 initiative as well. And to date, we've financed about 130 projects in almost 60 emerging markets. And our focus is really on mobilizing private capital. We have a lot of projects in our pipeline, but about 16 of those have reached commercial or financial close. Of those, mobilizing almost 7 billion in private capital. So again, we see this as an important signal to ensure that we do work closely with governments through our MDB partners, but it's really making sure that these projects are commercially viable and attractive to the private sector. And increasingly, we're seeing that it's not just about getting the project out there, but ensuring that these quality considerations are there. This comes through the efficiencies of the project, ensuring good governance of the project or program itself, looking at things like climate mitigation, resilience, understanding of disaster risk, ensuring that social and environmental factors are really translated throughout each stage of the project lifecycle. And the GIF is really focused, I'd say, more on the upstream to midstream stage. We help governments to plan, prioritize, and prepare projects or programs against a series of smaller projects that fall under a more standardized program that can be replicated. But all the way through to the tendering phase and getting the project ready to be financed by the private sector. And so at each stage, we're really working with the government and our MDB partners to help conduct those pre-feasibility and feasibility studies, looking at the technical soundness of the project. But we integrate all of the good practices in the market, the IFC performance standards, Equator principles, the UN environmental and social principles. All of these factor into the work because we are very much focused on not reinventing the wheel, but really using what's available in the market to ensure that these projects meet these high kind of environmental and social standards we're looking for. But there's still, I think, a lot of work to be done there. And I think the other panelists highlighted that, there's still a lack of ESG data out there, particularly as it relates to nature-based solutions or natural infrastructure. I think for the GIF, we see, increasing calls for more investments in nature-based solutions. But as it relates to our own portfolio and pipeline, there's still a little bit of work to be done. I think we need to still meet countries where they're at and understanding what are the policy constraints they have, how they prioritize nature-based solutions or climate adaptation resilience in their national planning agendas, their kind of own perspective on climate solutions. And so, for some countries, particularly in some of the countries that we work in, nature-based solutions or natural infrastructure will take time. In fact, many of them are still in that transitioning away from kind of these hard to abate sectors and kind of moving even just away from coal intensive and pretty carbon intensive industries. So we try to move the needle if and where we can. So the GIF is working both on the project preparation side, and we are also developing a downstream finance mechanism. It will be sort of like a blended finance vehicle to de-risk projects and infrastructure portfolios in some of the markets we work in. Again, kind of understanding that there are these financial risks and barriers that prevent private capital from flowing into these markets. But beyond these two kind of areas, both on the upstream and downstream that the GIF is involved in, we're also a global collaboration platform. So we work very closely with not just our MDB partners and the private sector, but other global initiatives in the ecosystem. And just maybe two that I'll highlight briefly. One is with this Bloomberg-led initiative called Climate Finance Leadership Initiative. And they're essentially helping to create what these types of country platforms, which I know is kind of hot topic in this space right now, but the idea of helping to build up these kind of bottom-up, country-driven approaches to mobilizing private capital for sustainable infrastructure solutions. And of course, natural infrastructure considerations fall into that equation. And so we're pilot testing this. We launched the India pilot back in September of last year and have a few more in the pipeline. But the idea is, GIF is kind of helping to coordinate work between government counterparts and the private sector alongside MDB partners and other resource partners to really crystallize what are the key enabling environment or policy barriers for mobilizing capital at scale and helping to really identify infrastructure projects, really concrete projects that the private sector can finance that meets the country's NDCs or long-term strategies and other climate-related goals in line with the SDGs. So we're hoping to continue scaling these up because we really do see that, as the other panelists mentioned, each country context is very different, and what that path looks like towards scaling up more natural infrastructure really depends on the context and the unique barriers specific to that area. And then finally, the kind of big global initiative that the GIF has been really leading on is this Fast Infra Sustainable Infrastructure label. And again, I think so many people have mentioned the idea that good principles are out there. And so the SI label is really just meant to create more harmonization and hopefully increase the transparency of ESG data as it relates to sustainable infrastructure assets. So it's meant to provide this consistent and globally applicable labeling system to the asset itself. We see this both helpful for governments as they help to prepare projects, and that's kind of where the GIF fits in, but also further downstream to ensure that there is that positive market signal that projects meet core environmental, social resiliency and governance needs. And kind of within the Fast Infra label are 14 crucial sustainability criteria that we've really winnowed down after doing a pretty extensive mapping of existing taxonomies, frameworks, and standards in the market, kind of spanned across 4 dimensions of sustainability. So we made that environmental, social, governance, and adaptation and resilience. And when we think about how this tool can be really useful for scaling up natural infrastructure in particular, I think, of course, the 14 criteria build on IFC performance standards, equator principles. There's still a lot of minimum safeguards that need to be met to meet the label requirements. But we do, we have, I think, even members of our technical working group here in the audience, but help to really craft some of these criteria that we see as really crucial for natural infrastructure, that being ensuring that we're not just doing no harm to biodiversity, but really seeing kind of a net gain to biodiversity and broader ecosystems. So we have a sustainability criteria around that, of course, around climate change mitigation and adaptation and resilience. But also on the social side, we do have both baseline criteria and positive contribution criteria as it relates to stakeholder engagement. FPIC is really core to that criteria as well, since we understand very much as it comes to natural infrastructure that it is very unique to the environments in which this asset is located, and ensuring that there is that inclusive consultation, that we are bringing together a broad spectrum of stakeholders at each stage of the life cycle, both at the pre-operational and operational stages of an asset, and ensuring that it meets kind of the best practice out there on this topic, as well as land acquisition and resettlement considerations as well. So again, happy to share the full criteria for those who are interested. But the GIF has been involved in not just helping to prepare this framework, but now crucially moving from the endorsement that we got at COP26 to ensuring that it can be implemented. GIF, from where we stand, will be looking to incorporate the Fast Infra SI label in the projects that we prepare in the future, and ensuring that we're working with our MDB partners to use it, since we see sustainability as pretty core to the pipeline that we're looking to prepare with our partners. and of course build the capacity of our client governments to increase their awareness and really show the business case surrounding sustainability, why it's important, not just out of something that makes us feel good, but really because it prolongs the asset, it improves communities, it demonstrates inclusivity and promotes kind of equitable access to key infrastructure services. So I'll stop there, but thank you.
Thanks, Carmel. Yeah, I think that that sounds this SI label sounds really useful. And I was also again reflecting on our comments about the the human rights and the SDGs, and there's ESGs, and I'm just wondering, and I don't know, Brendan, if this is anything that you deal with, but do you see that the sort of diversity of definitions and terms and criteria as any sort of barrier to the investments for natural infrastructure?
Thanks, Samantha. My internet seems getting a bit shaky. At least I get you and you both of you a bit shaky. So let me know if you cannot hear me well. I think there is on the using nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure for achieving infrastructure and resilience, climate resilience, adaptation functions, while benefiting nature. I think we have a bit of a lack of standards and indicators to make sure that that actually happens. That is my experience. So when I look at our projects and many development projects that we're seeing also in other partner development banks, we are monitoring what the beneficiaries are of the infrastructure that we're putting in place, be it natural infrastructure or non-natural infrastructure. We are keeping sometimes relatively coarse indicators and standards of what is the natural area that's being restored. In the best case scenario, maybe the number of trees planted or something like that. And I think where we need to move to is having a more comprehensive set of indicators and result tracking and design standards to look at what is actually the biodiversity and the nature value of these natural infrastructure and these nature-based solutions, as well as their adaptation or other infrastructure functions. And I think that is still quite hard when we work with teams, teams working on either large-scale mangrove restoration projects or teams working on urban biodiversity engagements. They're planning individual interventions, but how do we plan them? How do we choose the right species to make sure that they have a positive biodiversity function? What do we do after 5 years when the project closes? Do we have indicators for the sustainability of those interventions, for the maintenance, for the financing of those? And I think that's where it's still a little bit lacking. And we also don't really understand it well enough, is my perspective. So we are pretty good now at integrating natural solutions together with gray infrastructure in hybrid interventions and doing that relatively well. But when you ask our experts, which species should I plant? How do I ensure the connectivity between these areas? And how do I actually ensure that I reach the right size for certain species diversity to stay there for a while? I think there's still answers there, questions there that require an answer and that require standards and thinking and to be integrated in our planning. And I agree with what has been said before, that a lot of our environmental social programming is still mostly to prevent negative impacts, although the new environmental and social framework of the World Bank is also designed in a way to optimize positive impact. But still, that I think that there's still some work to do there. And then finally, we need still better standards, and there are new standards coming out all the time now on nature-based solution standards, Iucn standard and things. But actual understanding of what is the type of infrastructure service that can be achieved with the natural infrastructure intervention. For example, what is the protection level that can actually be achieved with a mangrove wetland intervention? And how do we measure that? How do we monitor that? There's also still some lack of understanding on those type of physical protection or physical infrastructure service standards or results of these type of interventions. So I think very good progress over the last few years, and I think a few areas where we can still definitely improve on the standard side.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thanks, Brendan. I think some of the things that you were mentioning also have to do with whether we even have the science yet behind it, right? Around working with nature in such a way, and also the the difference between the sort of traditional engineering way of aiming towards a certain standard to working with nature, where there's going to be a bigger uncertainty band around what you're actually achieving. So there really is. This is one of the paradigm shifts that everybody will have to go through. I'm conscious of time. We've got about 10 minutes left in the panel, and I really want to ask everyone about what are the sort of most important actions we need to take going forward. And but it looks also like Todd has maybe dropped off the call. I just want to check if he can hear us or if he's present or not. Otherwise. Yes, or otherwise we'll just have to work with those that are still on, if that's all right. So I don't hear or see Todd, so I think he may have lost his connection. Hopefully everybody else is still here. Maybe Midori and Brendan can, if they can, keep their cameras on. I don't know if your connections are strong enough, but yes, I think that it's been a really interesting discussion, and I'd really like to know also, what you think is the priority that we need to do next in order to really move towards mainstreaming natural infrastructure in the sort of pipeline of solutions that we have to address the significant amount of challenges that we're currently facing. And I'm hoping that Midori, you might do the honors of answering first.
Yes, I'll try. Yes, I don't know. So I guess a couple of points. I think, because we don't have much time, right, in terms of the trajectory of biodiversity loss, which is happening now, and also in terms of the, projected increase in infrastructure investment. So I think one of the key, in addition to obviously finding out ways to really have, clear measurement of biodiversity units and, the change in ecosystem conditions and all that. At the same time, I think there's a need for really big sort of narrative shift, the way we look at nature as humanity and our relationship with nature and economy. I think that some big change, sort of social norm change, has to happen in coming years. And like smoking in public spaces became total no-no in fairly short period of time, so many years. The action to destroy nature or any reckless infrastructure development which might have negative impact on nature, that sort of action by businesses or government or individuals has to become really taboo, socially and economically taboo, and therefore that acts as the deterrent for that kind of action, because there's no more nature to spare, really. We have to protect what we have left, and we have to start really restoring and nurturing the nature so that we can use nature and nature-based solution towards achieving SDGs. And also, as I mentioned earlier, we really need to start looking at nature as development asset, not traditional sort of natural resources to be, managed and used and often overexploited. So how we can make that shift in the society, in the global community, I think that's really the key. And again, that shift really needs to happen in the next 3-4 Yes, and as UNDP, we are also thinking how, we can be part of that shift in the narratives and social norms and therefore behavioral change. And I also talked about asset class, nature needs to become an asset class. But of course, if you talk to a finance person, they will ask, what's the, return, right? Financial return. Again, there has to be some kind of shift there because, okay, there may not be traditional financial return, which you can put in your pocket or in your company's coffer, but obviously there's a lot more actual social, or public or social return for a wider community around the world by preserving nature, by investing in nature, natural infrastructure. So again, this big shift in the way we think about nature, we deal with nature has to change. Over.
Thanks, Meghalaya. Brendan, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Samantha. Well, a lot has been said. It's also a big question. What do we need to do then next? And I think there's a lot of things happening, as I said, on the standards side and setting targets side. I think what we need to do is on the infrastructure investment and infrastructure planning side, we need to make sure that every new infrastructure engagement that we are starting and coastal adaptation, interventions, and these kind of things, from the very start, integrate the identification and the full consideration of natural infrastructure options into their designs and feasibility studies. And what we often see now is that project documents may have a vague mention of natural infrastructure into their planning process. But then when it comes to the actual feasibility study and detailed designs that the governments are managing with expert engineering firms, this is often where these notions a bit get lost, where engineering firms are better and more comfortable working with gray infrastructure approaches, and the natural infrastructure approaches sometimes become a little bit of an add-on. And then by the time you get to implementing these interventions, the natural aspect of these infrastructure interventions is often less than what you would have thought at the beginning. And it's a gradual process. And because it's difficult, we don't have the data often, we don't have the good practices, we often have limited timelines, limited financing. So it is a complex question. But I think what we need to do all together as a global community is really work in those upstream sides, make sure we do the studies, we have all the knowledge, we have the data, make sure governments have access to international experts as well, who can actually help bring these natural infrastructure approaches from paper to reality in the early project phase before it's too late. So I think that is one part of what I think that should be done. The biodiversity side is definitely another part where I think we need to be a little bit more serious with what we see as natural infrastructure, and making sure that the natural infrastructure we put in place and that we're designing and that we're advocating for actually has a positive natural function, as well, as I mentioned before. And that is still often not the case. Sometimes we don't know what to do, but I think the risk is that if we call every infrastructure project that also plants a few trees a natural infrastructure project, then we might end up with thinking we have a huge portfolio of natural restoration projects together with infrastructure investments, and we might end up, doing a little bit of, greenwashing, or we put the numbers in a way that it might sound better from the natural side than it actually is. So I think it is a key priority for us together to figure out how do we do that, and how do we make sure that every natural infrastructure design and project is actually on the long term beneficial for nature. So that's an additional point, and yeah, let me stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Kantuta, what should we do next? What's the absolute priority?
Yes, to ensure that Indigenous knowledge is fully reflected in natural infrastructure, I think that in the future we have to think and promote documentation of traditional knowledge and the documentation of natural infrastructure. We need the documentation to be done with the understanding and the respect of the traditional knowledge. For example, the photo that Midori showed at the beginning is an example of that documentation of traditional knowledge. And Indigenous youth and Indigenous researchers are returning to their communities to document and go back to their land, because many of the youth of Indigenous youth have been distant from their communities because of forced displacement or migration. And once that they return to their communities, they are allowed to go back to their land and return to their traditional knowledge, which allows these Indigenous researchers to push for institutionalization of traditional knowledge and documentation of this traditional knowledge involving nature. And just in general for Indigenous youth, as I've said, traditional knowledge is oral, so youth has to start to record our dances, our practices, our stories to protect that knowledge. And Indigenous youth have started writing about that traditional knowledge to document and to show that those traditional knowledge will be used for the next generations. I think that every state can document their unique practices so the next generation learn from them and preserve its meaning. It's essential to promote the active participation of Indigenous peoples so they can use their own researchers for the documentation of their traditional knowledge in natural infrastructure. So Indigenous peoples tell their own stories and promote their own view on natural infrastructure. And yes, I think that this supports SDGs because we are saying leave no one behind. So Indigenous peoples want to be part of the discussion and participate in these active solutions for natural infrastructure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. And hopefully that is one thing that technology can help with, is in actual documentation. We still have to learn, though. We still have the limits of our humanity. And Carmel, could you also tell us where you think we should prioritize our actions?
In the interest of time, I'll keep it short. And also, I think the other panelists summarized it very well. But I think an absolute priority is really building that capacity at the most upstream level with governments, particularly as it relates to natural infrastructure projects that are, public-private, have heavy involvement of the government. Helping them to really understand and crystallize the concept of natural infrastructure and really how it can be beneficial over the long term to the overall sustainability of the asset and the communities they're looking to serve. Of course, I'd say just ensuring that we're channeling the right resources, not just to project preparation facilities that exist within multilateral development banks, but also ensuring study of transfer of knowledge and technical expertise to these national and regional project preparation facilities as well, building that local knowledge so that there's the ability to ensure kind of funding and financing to infrastructure projects at the local level that can really tap into local resources and capital markets. I think additionally, and I think Brendan described it well, we need to kind of move beyond just the consideration of biodiversity that's included in these pre-feasibility and feasibility studies, but and really moving beyond that to ensure that there's positive contribution to the surrounding ecosystems and environment. This requires really dedicated technical expertise, specialized knowledge, ensuring that we're bringing in the right consultants and experts at the right time to ensure that there's a really rigorous consideration of natural infrastructure solutions at the most upstream stages before the asset is built, and even for kind of existing assets, ensuring that there's opportunities to integrate that. Again, I mentioned just one initiative, but there are tons of toolkits and guidebooks on biodiversity, on natural infrastructure. These are free and readily available as well, and I think should be scaled up and ensure that this is promoted amongst MDBs, government partners, because I think they provide a lot of value. And as well as we're thinking about the financing side, ensuring that we're also speaking in a language that the private sector responds well to, really demonstrating that business case, showing what those dividends look like over the long term, understanding kind of new approaches to like what a return on an investment can look like through investments in natural infrastructure. And that really comes with just a full consideration of the project life cycle and ensuring that these projects are really promoted in such a way that puts quality front and center. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. That's great. Are there any questions? I don't think there are any questions from the participants. At least I haven't seen them in the chat. But if anybody has any questions right now, if you want to raise your hand or put them in the chat, I will try to summarize this, what I think was a very rich conversation about natural infrastructure. And I think that overall, we've covered a lot of the sort of key questions that we came in to understand a bit more about in terms of the barriers that we're seeing, the opportunities, especially around sort of financing mechanisms and perhaps some other mechanisms as well. But I think that there are perhaps a few maybe more resonating points that may have come out most in this sort of final actions. And just sort of starting with the perhaps the bigger scale, scaling up. I think that we had different inputs around sort of starting with respecting nature, there being a paradigm shift that we have to have a different relationship with nature, but also a different relationship with humanity, that there's got to be greater respect for both, and that's got to be the start. And you know, I'd say even if we have principles and a lot of the frameworks and groundwork in place, that paradigm shift really needs to take place for those to be effective. And then I think that then at the sort of normal place that we start in terms of when we say upstream, which may not be paradigm shifts, but more like policy and planning. Starting with the understanding of nature at the strategic points, and then filtering them down. I think that we've heard this in a couple comments about how we get it down to the ground, literally. It gets diluted and diluted as we go down, and part of that is capacity building along the way. And somehow we need to get better at integrating sort of bottom up and top down. We know we've got a lot of knowledge, you know, at the ground level. We need to use that knowledge, but we also have a lot of good guidance and strategy and things that they need to come together better. Otherwise, we're losing a lot through the processes. We need more data, we need more capacity, we need more good processes. And I think this also this ties in with the comment about needing, you know, better documentation of Indigenous knowledge, of Indigenous practices, of what's actually, I think we will need to have a more widespread understanding of things like biodiversity and nature than it currently sitting in a sort of specialist domain. This is really going to have to become part of an interdisciplinary sort of ecosystem. Yes, and you know, a couple nods towards how we look at biodiversity and the importance of the interventions that we do actually having positive outcomes, not just putting in place some nature to put it really simply, but actually looking at what the outcomes are. And at the moment, there is a huge gap with that. You can certainly see that it's like clicking that trees are excellent carbon sinks, and we know that mitigation has been one of the easier things for people to at least get their heads around, if not their money around it. So there we go. Let's plant some trees, and that's not going to be the solution. That's not that's only a small part of it, and needs greater understanding, and we really need to look at not just avoiding harm, but creating positive outcomes, and that requires a greater understanding. And then I think there were a couple really important points about finance. I mean, we talked about, we heard some examples of some, interesting instruments, mechanisms that are currently being tried, and I think that's really helpful, and we'll be able to share those. But I think that there are a couple comments. I think that seeing nature as an asset class is a really important part. It's kind of along the lines of the paradigm shift again. But we're really facing a huge challenge still in terms of getting carbon credits to actually be valuable, to actually getting nature to be given the value that we need it to have in order to make the changes that are needed. And we've got a gap there, and that could be one of the things that would really help that. And also, I think there were really important input around understanding how nature enhances infrastructure value, how it helps to increase the longevity of its value, and just that appreciation of what do the dividends of natural infrastructure look like long term. I think that's something that's just still sort of in the known unknowns for most, and that's really important and powerful to ensure that that investment happens, and that it happens in the right way. So I hope that I've been able to capture at least some of what you've kindly shared with us today, and I thank you again for all of your points and insights and examples. And I'm going to hand back over to Hussein to close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. I don't know if you're able to see and hear me well. Okay, am I audible? Fantastic. Thank you so much, Samantha, and the colleagues in the panel. I have been really listening with care to all of the presentations, and thank you, Samantha, for wrapping and bringing some conclusions and suggestions out of the discussion. I think what I learned from this is that we are dealing with a very complex nexus. There are so many issues into it that I think it requires more discussions, more dialogue. We, from our side, especially from the EMG side, that brings together so many sectors from economic, social, environmental, humanitarian, human rights, and so on, because there are so many co-benefits, but also there are so many trade-offs in this context of sustainable and natural infrastructure. I think we really need our communication also around this topic. We need to improve advocacy around this topic, simplify our language and narrative around this, because there were so many intertwined issues that sometimes make it also difficult for the clients to find the right way. As I said, we have had this approach in the past few years to look into this infrastructural issues from a control point of view by applying and recommending safeguards and control systems to make sure that it will not harm the environment and the humanity. But we are now getting it in a completely maybe the other side in terms of protecting nature, doing good to the environment, and also we are looking at it in terms of the post-COVID recovery and building back better. So it's really the two sides of the coin that we need to look at it and try maybe to showcase, as it was mentioned, to scaling up certain examples that have worked in certain countries. I would very much love to really see how can we demonstrate this, very concretely at the country level, and then try to scale it up in other places. I think it was very useful that it was mentioned that maybe we can benefit from existing initiatives such as the page in order to maybe sort of inject in some kinds of examples of sustainable or natural infrastructure that a policy or an approach that can be tested and then be shown. So from our side, again, we are very much thankful to all of the thoughts that came to the table. I'm sure that we will have a good summary of this discussion that not only can help policymakers outside of the UN, but also with, to the EMG itself and the Issue Management Group on Sustainable Infrastructure as well. And I really believe that we need to have more of these dialogues around this topic to also understand what exactly we need to do in terms of, as I said, enhancing advocacy, but also showing how this can be done so that the two sides of, not harming the nature and the society, but also doing good to the nature and society can be done in a balanced manner. So with that, we are very much thankful to all of you. As a tradition, we always like to take a photo when we organize these Nexus Dialogues so that we can keep a memory of these things and also keep a record of our, dear colleagues and their resources around this issue. So with your permission, I would like to invite all of the colleagues who are in the panel to, if they can activate their camera so that Yannicka can help us to take a photo of the panel and Samantha as a moderator so that we can also leave that as a heritage for the future dialogue. So Yannicka, is there a way that we should take that photo via the application? Because I do not know how to do that.
Yes, I will take a screenshot. I'll count to 3 and then I'll click.
Great.
1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yannicka, did I miss any sort of ending note? We haven't heard from Joseph, who has been the sort of the cornerstone of all this work and his team. I don't know if Joseph is there in the call to say a few words before we conclude it, and also yourself, Yannicka, if there is any other words of closure that we should submit to the meeting before we close it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hossein. Just a huge thanks from my side as well to all the panelists and to yourself and all colleagues that have made this happen. From my perspective, this was a really rich and interesting discussion, a lot of very honest and concrete opinions and insights, and we'll be taking these forward in the consultative process and making sense of all these over the next few days and weeks. So thank you again, and all the best from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you. Yannicka, over to you.
I think what is left for me to say is really to also warmly thank everybody for joining today. Thank you to all participants who were here. We will be uploading the recording of this event as well on the EMG website for those who could not attend the call. So there will be a broader outreach as well. And otherwise, thank you to Samantha for the very able moderating of this event, and to all panelists for your very interesting and forward-looking contributions to this debate. So I think we are ready to close on time, and with this, the EMG Secretariat wishes everyone a nice continued day or a nice evening, depending on your time zone.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.